Good afternoon. I'm Sofia Trotsenko, and I will moderate this session, the name of which is Industry in a Modern City, Conversion or Innovation. Sergei Semyonovich yesterday mentioned that Moscow is a capital and also an economic center where urbanistics develop quickly and also new standards of life are formed quickly. It sets the tone for other regions. Like in any other quickly changing economic situation with high social demand, the city should not just follow these changes, but also initiate them and moderate its own development. What economic potential does industry and industrial territory have? What types of industry will be in demand and competitive? And what the industrial zones should look like? They are not unique. Urbanists used to think about them in other cities like Seoul, Düsseldorf, Boston, and Shanghai, meeting the challenges of post-industrial policy, have formed their policy and have coped with their tasks. There are sad examples as well. The definition of industrial policy is not just the issue of industry. It also affects employment, transport, infrastructure, ecology, the issues of city environment. Today, the head of science department, Mr. Bocharov, will help me. Yesterday, we agreed that this way it will be more interesting. In fact, there should be two presentations, the Department of Industrial Policy and City Planning Department, on how they will interact. What can we see today? Today, we are part of information economy. Not a single employer will say what is the balance of workforce, what are the competences of workforce he will need in 6 months. The employer always takes part in competition. Technology becomes a tool of common use too quickly, and to forecast intellect in a big city is more and more difficult. High school is under this pressure all the time. In the demand for labor resources, HR always often set social competences and more rarely specialized skills and expertise. The forecast for the development of information economy becomes more complicated. Digital system. Without IT, you can't imagine any industry in this city, any service. Trade in IT becomes a separate area. All these things need to be taken into account of socio-economic development in terms of the balance of intellect that the city can offer using its scientific resources. The city attracts the best of Russians through its cultural events and cultural centers and potentialities. The main task of set yesterday and today, we, together with other big cities, need to create a new environment. So I act as a technical customer at this session, and what you say, we will make part of 2015 program that will be approved one of these days. Before we start discussing conversion or innovation, we need to understand the tasks that the city needs to solve, and what is the city planning situation in Moscow. I would like Sergei Ivanovich Lovkin, head of city planning department of Moscow, to discuss this. Thank you, Sofia. Good afternoon, dear friends, colleagues. I hope you can hear me. Yes, of course, our city is big, complex, diverse, and in different periods of life it suffered different constructions of its development. Classical industry used to be the main driver, including heavy industry. In Soviet times, we had heavy and light industry as well. In the past years, including perestroika, global changes, make the city change, and the functions of production and territories have been changing too. So before answering the question on the territory of conversion or innovations, I would like to mention the figures that we face in order to understand what's Moscow industry and its territory. Over 18% account for industrial and utilities territory, according to our general plan adopted in 2010. Scientific production and utilities, about 5,000 hectares, are to be reorganized. However, the rest of the territory, which is going to preserve its status, if there are conditions for these territories to contract their production areas so that they could make their production more compact and develop their territories in a manner favorable for the environment, for the city environment. Also, 1.5 thousand hectares appeared in the city of Troitsk and New Moscow district. We know only too well that today industrial and utilities territories is a valuable reserve for the development of the city, a unique reserve. And the city should make use of it in an accurate manner without making any mistakes. I think that within the boundaries of old Moscow, which is more ready, there is no other unique territory like that. And the task set by Mayor Sobyanin is devoted to the territories that will allow to liquidate the balance between healthcare institutions, kindergartens, housing space, etc., as well as roads close to industrial territories. It's an opportunity to create highly technological jobs on the basis of factories that either work or just survive. It is the ability of creating recreation spaces, space for development of human potential, which has just been discussed at the session today. At the same time, I can add, and everybody understands this, we discussed it with Oleg Evgenovich. We exchange opinions and offers as to how this could be done. We are unwilling to withdraw industry away from Moscow to other regions or to Moscow Oblast. We feel we should reform it turn it into territories with high added value, create competitive advantages as compared to other big cities. This way, highly technical, well-paid jobs will be created, and these territories will be something that we'll be proud of in future. And in the past Soviet years, such territories created high added value and a big contribution to gross regional product, which is very important for the development of the city. Today, like all big cities in the world, we face the problem that in these territories there are different land users and owners of property complexes with different interests. Some of them are interested to remain within the existing construction with minimal income. Others want to develop, act dynamically, and this is an obstacle in complex implementation of such zones. If we follow the route that started a few years ago through planning or other documents of city development, none of the instruments gives an answer how this can be done as a complex, taking separate territories and developing them. In future, we create a problem for subsequent complex development of the whole territory. This occurs when 2 or 3 centers have been launched. However, it's difficult to combine them, and it hinders the development of new objects. Investors can also see their potential in reorganizing these territories as a business. We talked to the Ministry of Construction with the development of a federal law which will allow to solve these problems. The new ministry responded, and today we have a working group headed by Mr. Plotnikov, and we hope that together with our colleagues in the first quarter of 2015, the new results will be seen. These territories are a reserve that should be used ideally, and we should be very particular about them. Okay, I have 2 questions, 2 political questions about this keynote presentation. Sergei Ivanovich, it's very important to evaluate industrial zone as a system of development. If it is behind a big fence, we understand that different sites have different investment attractiveness, and we can see that the most effective parts of industrial zones were used for trade malls. A specific example from a meeting in Zelenograd Board of Directors, we demonstrate some of the projects to the President, Premier, Mayor, and one of the speakers said that on a plot of 3 hectares they achieved highest results. And when she mentions the figure of her income and we calculate it in square meters, I realize that if 3 or 33-story buildings are built there, it is comparable to the sale of 1 floor. Then we make new calculations and we realize that as compared with real production activities, the economic impact is 100 times lower than the implementation of a regular developer project. We often see that successful enterprises with good scientific base slowly deteriorate for one reason: because the owner of the plot of land says, why should I be involved in high-tech or nuclear industry? I will just sell part of my territory and build houses there. What should we do with these speculative expectations to eliminate them and at the same time give birth to a new investment attractiveness? Oleg Evgenovich, I think this should be the result of our joint work, industrial and city planning. If they are friends with each other, they won't be able to live without one another. And it's like, I know what director you're speaking about. Suppose he's interested in building some real estate on his territory, and if he builds it and gets high rent from it, he should invest it in high technologies, because high technologies will earn a lot. If industrial policy supports enterprises, and there will be opportunities to find money quickly, I think the benefit will be mutual. Often we see that industrial territories are not launched. They are just in ruins, and the owners don't even take care of them. If an investor comes, we ask them a complex plan, and the investor has spent a lot of money. He has read about the economy of this zone, and now he faces the problem. He understands that inside there are owners of plots of lands of industrial zones that will withhold them, waiting for the development of other plots in order to make as much money as possible. How can we avoid such speculations? Together with the legislators, we want to develop mechanisms when we want to interest those who are waiting for the capitalization of their plots. We want them simultaneously to be involved in joint redevelopment of each plot with those who initiated the development of these territories. This is a difficult instrument, and it was a big surprise to me when 3 years ago, when I came to the department and started reorganizing industrial territories, I realized that Renault factories owned a big territory for 20 years while the territory was reorganized. And what do we have here? In one of the complexes, the land belonged to Moscow, and the mayor decided, and the government made the relevant decision, and tomorrow we are launching this object.
The mayor of Moscow said that he wanted to make it public, and he wanted to work jointly with the current generation for the benefit of the future generation. Well, thank you for your presentation. You know that Germany faced this problem earlier than Russia, and Düsseldorf put forward a very good solution to this issue. Currently, Düsseldorf is one of the biggest industrial centers of Germany, and the concept of city development envisages to provide support to industry, and that's also a part of the general land use plan. We will talk today about Düsseldorf and how the plans of city development are made considering this issue. Let me give the floor now to Ruth. It's Ruth Orcesek-Krupa. He represents the mayor's office of Düsseldorf. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to speak here and to tell you how the industry in Düsseldorf is organized. The next slide, please. First, let me brief you on the location of Düsseldorf in the map of Europe. This is rather a small city with only 100,000 inhabitants. On the other hand, it's located in one of the industrial districts in the northern part of the center. Just to imagine the size of this urban sprawl, let me tell you that and to give you some idea of the concentration, I would tell you that 30% of the total population of Germany lives in the region of Düsseldorf plus its suburbs. Besides, the sprawl around Düsseldorf totals 11.6 million people. This is one of the biggest urban sprawls in terms of the economy. Let's look at the economy structure of this city. And you can see that it's quite various. There are diverse directions. This helped us to comparatively easily survive the crisis of 2008. And the next slide, please. The concepts of our development has analyzed the structure of employment in the city. We have reviewed also the consumption structure for the period since 2007 up to 2013, and we can conclude that the consumer potential has grown fivefold. It's closely related to another social factor. Our share in the industrial sector is declining consistently. You can see it on the graph. And the share of services has considerably grown. In particular, it's related to the international status of our enterprises. In spite of some decline of employment, the growth of the economy continues. In North Rhine-Westphalia, Düsseldorf is rated number 3 in terms of its economic development. It's in particular related to the fact that some taxes are forwarded directly to the city's budget. Our budget volume is about 2.5 billion euros, while the volume of taxes totals about 9 million euros. This slide represents several companies that pay this industry tax that has been mentioned. Some of them are the leaders in their sectors, like chemical works, machine building, and I'm sure you know many of them. Mercedes-Benz is one of them, and one of its best models is manufactured in Düsseldorf. This economic development of Düsseldorf, and it's based on R&D and science. We certainly are very serious about the development of industry in Düsseldorf. And the concept of the city's development comprises the aspects like the development of the population and the development of the industry. Here you can see the main 4 directions of this development. That they first of all help to strengthen the industrial basis and promote further development of the city. We were trying to develop a wide range of sectors. We strengthen the international links of our enterprises and industries. Also, we try to strengthen the innovations. As you can see, all these 4 aspects are closely related to the industrial development of Düsseldorf. One of these projects is the general plan of industrial development.
Politik und Industrie haben entschieden, neue Wege der Kooperation, und zwar gemeinsam, zu beschreiten und ein gemeinsames Industriekonzept für Düsseldorf zu erarbeiten.
Our department has decided to develop unified industrial policy of Düsseldorf development and a unified development plan.
Konzepte und Maßnahmen, die der Industriestandort Düsseldorf in seinem Bestand und mit seinen Arbeitsplätzen gesichert, weiterentwickelt und zukunftsfähig gestaltet werden kann.
The goal is to strengthen Düsseldorf's position as an industrial center to provide workplaces for the population and to preserve this trend, and also to make a development plan for the future. Besides, we have a very effective platform for the dialogue with the industrial sector and the sector of politics.
Der Prozessablauf verläuft in 5 Arbeitsgruppen des Masterplans Industrie, in denen die Grundsätze und Leitlinien und Maßnahmen erarbeitet werden.
This process includes 4 work groups. Each of them has a plan of several events. The first group focuses on zoning and the infrastructure. The second group is technologies and clusters. The third one is the power sector. And number 4 concentrates on creating the industrial image of our city. It includes, for instance, by-night guided tours, so the people can visit industrial enterprises in the night and have a look at what they do, how they work. And the fifth group focuses on the labor market and the market of training. The first group, which works on zoning and industry, actively participates in developing the general plan of the city's development and submits its proposals to this plan. The diagram shows the share of industrial enterprises in the overall structure of the city. It's really big. And we constantly discuss this share, and if needed, we find relevant solutions. Also, we take care of the proper use of industrial areas and the proper development process. This slide represents the picture of the most famous industrial enterprises located in Düsseldorf. I hope I have managed to brief you on our industrial development, and I want to emphasize that we are constantly developing and constantly looking for new solutions. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much, Ruth. This was a wonderful presentation, extremely valuable, since we're a bit behind the schedule, I would suggest that we should now listen to all presentations and have some time for Q&A afterwards. So let's proceed with our agenda. As I mentioned before, one of the most important forms of industrial development in Moscow is the development of high-tech enterprises. Igor Agamirzian is present here today. He is the CEO of AVK company, which invests into high-tech enterprises. So the floor is yours. And please tell us where Moscow now is suitable for this type of enterprises. Thank you. Let me have a small disclaimer at the beginning. I'm not a city planning expert or a development expert. And can you hear me okay now? It was highly interesting for me to hear the previous presentations. I realized that they refer to the current city building policy. And I'm looking for new directions of investment. So I'm used to think in terms of distant or mid-term future. At least the time periods that are valid for the business market. I am a programmer and a mathematician by education, but in the recent 15 years, I have worked on ITs, and I have been interested in the Industrial Revolution and how it affects in general industrial development. This is vital knowledge for my work as an investor. So I have some idea of the current trends, and probably I think in wider terms than the previous speakers have mentioned. So let me talk about these long-term trends and their effects on city building trends, the organization of the city space. Clearly, a traditional industrial city is not valid for the new knowledge-based economy. It's just not suitable for this new technical reality. And we now can witness that these new technologies are becoming a reality today, and they're going to change the whole landscape of our life in the coming 15 years. Oleg has correctly mentioned today that ITs are vital for all industrial sectors today. And I can add that ITs are no longer just a platform for the development of all sectors. Moreover, they are the main driving impulse for generating added value in the economy. Let's take the development of any industrial sector. As you can see, all added value centers are related to design and engineering, while the industrial capacities function as the printer for some IT structure. And the most of CapEx are related to new ITs, and OpEx is always related to engineering and production. This is a persistent trend, and we can see that the advanced sectors have separated the design and production process. So it means that CapEx is separate from OpEx now. This trend can be observed in the pharmaceutical sector now.
And is the main trend in car building. The first plane developed in digital format It was launched 20 years ago. Today, all the global aviation uses digital production and digital development. The use of robots, though it is not a new phenomenon, has been developing for 40 years. In the past few years, has reached its exponent. You have all heard about 3D printing, and it's used in different areas. It's a new quality of industrial technologies, which is determined by information technologies, forming the basis of new industry. What follows from it in terms of economic and social impact? Economically, this means you must have heard about the process of returning of productions from Southeast Asia to the developed countries. Some people say that this is not new industrialization, it's a different industrialization on a different technical base. And the main generator of economy are the design centers and software and the whole complex of tools meant for this economy. Requirements are shifting for the personnel qualification, and the generator is the talent and the level of qualification. And traditional working professions are in lower demand. In the next few years, the level of impact of this industrial revolution will reach the same level in traditional professions like conveyor at the beginning of the 20th century. Ford's conveyors has practically killed Smith's profession. Only Smiths as artists have remained. And during our lifetime, typist's profession has also died, though it used to be a very popular office profession. The same will happen with the same classical professions. And it's a very important statement for me. I don't know whether my colleagues will agree. I'm firmly convinced that the model of mass production, which was a driver in the industrial period, in the new post-industrial epoch, will die. Production will turn into boutique, customized activities with specific demand from specific customer. We can see signs in a whole number of areas, from personalized medicine, when medicines are developed for a specific person, for his genome and his specific disease, and up to a shoe industry. Today, there are a number of startups that make a mathematical model of your food and then make shoes especially for your food, not mass production. It's very interesting that we are used to the model of production relations that exist today, that sometimes we don't understand how new this model is. There was no mass production of shoes 100 years ago. And 50 years ago, most of clothes were also made personal. And this will happen again in the next 10 or 20 years. In a sense, we'll be suffering the return of individual production when a boutique model will be used, and mostly small and medium-sized business will be involved. In big factories, aviation factories, they will continue functioning, but most of the development will occur through boutique model from big factories, clothes factories, and will return to the model of individual tailors that will use computers to cut and make clothes. The same will happen to the shoe factories, and this will be observed in all the areas servicing the needs of a particular person. This has a number of interesting consequences, not just economic but social ones as well, because most of the personnel that's regarded as qualified personnel will not be in demand any longer, and new skills will be in demand. So the general trend that we can expect is we'll return to small workshops. Like in trade, mega malls and small shops. The same is true of industry. Industrial zones of big production and small customized boutiques. This is my idea. No big city is now prepared for such development. Moreover, they contradict this model. In the past few years, small services are disappearing. Igor Rubenovich, I need to stop you because your report is very interesting. However, we are very limited in time. I've practically said everything. I suggest that we think not only in the short-term but long-term perspective as well. Thank you. You have discussed a very important topic of education and connection between technologies, innovations and technologies. Industrial designs will be one of the main parts of the production chain. In Moscow, we have examples of companies using innovative technologies and having experience of implementing projects from idea to implementation, like Bioclinicum, a company organized by Moscow University students. And I would like to give the floor to Dmitry Sakharov, CEO. Tell us about your experience. Bioclinicum was organized 6 years ago. It started with scientists' ideas, and then a real prototype was created. It was, in our case, it was a device for testing the safety of medicines. And in terms of city planning, innovations are also urgent. For our company, it was an access to educational resources, specialists from different areas, and we have biologists, engineers, mathematicians, IT specialists. Also, it's very important for such small companies, it's access to infrastructure. Moscow provides it now, and it allows companies to develop and create the product, which hopefully will transform our ideas about innovation. So everything starts with ideas. Then the stage of growth starts, and then the company joins the market and changes it. It's important without education, access to additional IT and design aspects, and it allows companies to develop. I tried to be brief. Let's go on then. I think we have a lot of questions. Ecology of the city, it's a mandatory requirement for maintaining investment attractiveness. The Pierre Belanger, professor of architecture in the design school of Harvard University, his activities is aimed at ecology and structure in planning cities. Please tell us the way you see it in Moscow.
And welcome. First of all, I should say that I am not an expert in city development nor an expert in technology. Second, this is the second time that I'm in Moscow, so I'm not an expert on Moscow. So consider this brief presentation as a kind of thought experiment. I just have one idea to communicate, which is possibly the idea in the shifting economies of demand from economies of supply, that we have to understand how to be able to construct ecology as economies. It's a very simple idea. How do we do that? We have to be able to understand how to be able to design landscape and living systems as infrastructures. I did a little bit of research to try to understand how I could make the presentation propositional and projective. I find it particularly funny, especially in the forum, that we talk about the urban, but yet we are only talking about a city. And I kind of wonder about the rest of the 130 million other people across Russia and how they contribute also to the economy. And I think it's important, given the fact that economies are not bounded by roads. When you draw a map of Moscow, you always draw it with roads, as if transportation engineers and the road planners are the ones that dictate what urbanization is. So I find it a little bit funny that over the past 300 years, we keep on inheriting the same idea over and over and over again. We talk about squares in the center, and then we talk about boulevard rings, the garden ring, second ring road, the third ring road, and then the fourth ring road. And I'm trying to wonder, are we going to keep on doing this forever? Are we going to just talk about the city forever in relationship to ring roads and development in relationship to roads themselves? And whether or not we're just going to continue the same kind of conversation about the centralization of the state. Now, it's a very dangerous thing for someone from North America to speak about alternatives to the state. So I'm going to be very careful. And I know that it's tenuous to compare bread lines with congestion, but I think they both have to do with the same thing, the centralization of control. And I'm going to propose that we need to think about decentralization in a very serious manner. And a way to think about decentralization and to think beyond the city is by thinking about the region. I'm really comforted by the fact that we've talked about the Rhine River region. Those three words have been extremely important. I'm really happy that we've talked about sprawl and suburbs because we need to talk about suburbanization and how to be able to design it, not stop it. So where do these models come from? I think we've been talking about centralization in a number of different ways. In industry is actually trying to consistently decentralize. Yet the state is always trying to control it and centralize it. And I think what we can do is to try to understand how to be able to place ecological systems at the center of development. And so rather than just simply have the city at the center of development, what we can do is actually start to think about how rivers themselves can be at the center of urban regions. If you take that a little bit further and start to modify that model, you begin to see how the river, not state, but the ecological processes and watersheds, drainage basins associated with the river can start to change form. They can change morphologies, and their processes can evolve. You can barely access the river here, and I find it really particularly interesting that there's this river, was the Moscow River and the Volga, and there's this 2,000 kilometer river that nobody seems to talk about when we talk about urbanization. The second thing is that I find it particularly funny that not only do we always refer to ring roads when we talk about Moscow, but we fail to understand that the real urbanist of not only Moscow, but I would say of the country, is actually Sergei Zuk, the kind of preeminent hydrologic engineer, because you live in the hydrological diagram that this engineer constructed over the past century. And yet we fail to really understand the impact of that. We've reversed rivers, and also at the same time we've engaged in massive hydrological projects. But I'm not just here to talk about water as part of the ecology of the future economy. I'm here to talk also about snow. Your water doesn't come from rain. It comes from melting snow. So every time you pick up a bottle of water and you buy it, and you don't use the water from your tap, think about this. 90% of your water comes from the snowpack. With climate change, I would be really concerned about understanding what effects are in your generation about that. And also, the lifespan of the hydrologic projects that were put in place over a century ago. Infrastructure doesn't last forever, and then your lifetime, you're going to have to rebuild what Sergei Zuk built. And you're going to have to ask yourself this question, are you going to rebuild it the same way again? Well, fortunately, there's some people that have talked about this, and I would propose, if we talk about industry, that we should necessarily talk about the new industrial state. You can buy this book for less than 20 rubles. There's plenty of prints out there. What I think is particularly important to transform notions about industry is to be able to understand that in the past century, capital and power became more important than land. That's why we draw cities and maps of the city without the ground, without the topography. That's why it doesn't matter that we don't access the river. And I would argue that we need to engage in a new relationship with land and the ground and with the water and the ecological processes that are connected with. So I'm going to just borrow from a really nice manifesto called the Volga Manifesto from 1763 from Catherine the Great that deposed Peter. She actually proposed a kind of migration manifesto. It was sort of like a suburbanization manifesto of drawing people to the land, drawing people to the Volga River region, to essentially produce, to farm, and to develop, and to spread. I mean, it's fantastic that we're talking about this 300 years ago. So I'm just very quickly going to compare a couple of rivers. My pointer doesn't work because, ironically, your television is so high-tech that it doesn't work, you see. But the Volga region, the Volga River is there. Hopefully you can see it. Let me point it out. So instead of comparing Moscow with other cities, I'm actually just going to compare the river region with other river regions. And I'm going to simply propose that we take a look at the Great Lakes region and the St. Lawrence region in North America. Both of them are about 2,000 kilometers long. I'm going to propose also that the biggest megacity and megalopolis in the world is this one. About 40 to 60 million people live in this region. You know what's remarkable is that it's not planned. It's divided between two countries. You don't know it. It is, you see the 5 lakes in the middle. You probably don't know it because every time you draw a map of Canada or that you draw a map of the US.
Каждый раз, когда вы видите карту, Канады и вы видите карту, сравниваете ее с картой США, то они могут выпадать, но по сути это 25% всех водных ресурсов. Вот таким образом эти ресурсы организованы. Но замечательно, что если мы будем сравнивать этот регион со всеми другими мировыми регионами, то ВВП будет занимать 4-е место. То есть это действительно очень высокий региональный уровень. И я считаю, что вообще желательно стратегически мыслить на уровне региона, а не на уровне отдельного города. Вот здесь приведена информация по этому региону. Мы знаем, что в своем развитии регион прошел целый ряд циклов, включая периоды возрождения, периоды бума экономики и периоды падения. И в настоящее время происходит процесс реорганизации городов и портов. Это производится в силу понимания того, как взаимодействуют водные ресурсы и сами водные ресурсы и городская инфраструктура. Мы сейчас, нам необходимо учитывать, что городская инфраструктура — это открытая среда, а не какой-то закрытый контейнер. Поэтому она активно взаимодействует со всеми окружающими ресурсами и окружающей средой. Соответственно, для нас стратегическое значение имеют все портовые инфраструктуры и инфраструктуры гавани. И, соответственно, мы разрабатываем специальные стратегические планы. Например, это очень важно для Торонто. Мы разрабатываем специальные инфраструктуры, которые учитывают наше взаимодействие с водной средой. Например, в Торонто этому уделяется очень большое значение. Составляются специальные планы с участием архитекторов. И это касается как водных ресурсов, так и хранения отходов. Кроме того, нам нужно учитывать, как мы будем работать с уже использованной водой или с водой, которая образуется в результате ливней и прочих природных явлений. Также необходимо продумать, как эту воду можно использовать для промышленных целей. Обычно инженеры и технические специалисты не любят этот слайд, потому что они больше заинтересованы в разной технической информации.
You cut a curb and you let the ground absorb water. And I'm just wrapping up in the next 30 seconds here. You begin to see that there's also, in places of production, overlay of energy production and agriculture. New models that emerge from even the most historic examples, such as Frank Lloyd Wright, who essentially was promoting this idea that we need access to land. And as I understand it, access to land here is not very easy, is it? Access to enterprise needs to be a lot easier. And I think what we need to do is learn how to be able to remove restrictions and unzone or dezone land as opposed to imposing more restrictions. We've been saying this for essentially, we've been exploring this for the past century and a half to 3 centuries if we look back to Catherine the Great. And I think what we need to understand is how to be able to look at river regions and develop models of urbanizing rivers at very large scales with very small details that we can transform areas. And then I think what we're going to be able to do is actually attract people to live there and to work there and also to innovate there. Whether or not it's looking at Edo River in Japan or whether or not it's looking at the Danube River in Austria and Germany, I think we need other models for understanding how to be able to develop economies. And so just simply in closing, we have these models where we can begin to understand ourselves moving beyond ideas of centralization of industry and look towards understanding a gradient and understanding urban regions as valleys. We produce, we consume. There's capitalism, there's markets, there's state control, but it happens along these gradients, and we need to turn around our plans and start to see it along these different sections. Luckily, there's a huge endowment in the Volga River region that we can essentially start to build on. And I would just like to propose, by looking at the ground and refiguring the ground, we can begin to understand, much like some of the research that was done at the Strelka Institute, of how to be able to develop ecology itself as capital. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to propose that maybe we should rethink even the basic language that we use, the basic idea of the city of Moscow, start to understand that there's a valley of urbanization that extends across 2,000 kilometers of the Volga, to potentially start understanding how to make and design and construct, even engineer productive ecologies. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Пьер. Ну вот ваш...
Thanks a lot, Pierre. And your report probably means that Moscow, as always, is in the foreground. I'm not sure about the Volga River, but last year we summed up the results of the competition on Moscow River. It was dedicated to Moscow as the center of some public spaces. We didn't view Moscow just as the center of transport lines. The first stage of Moscow development in late 18th till early 20th century, it was the period of the first factories. They were located along the banks of Moscow and Yauza River. That was related to the need to transport products and materials to plant and from the plants to clients. And later on, the second stage, which started, I think, in the 20th century, was the period of creating big industrial areas. The heritage of the first stage is plants and enterprises. Many of them have now become remarkable monuments of architecture. I would like now to give the floor to the representative of the General Plan Department. What do you think is the future of these remarkable memorials of architecture? Can you hear me well? The subject of my report, and Sofia has already briefed you on the subject, and she views it wider than I intended. So let me start with the most distant approach. The slide, which you can see, can you hear me better now? So this slide shows the structure of railways of Moscow as the main transport infrastructure of an industrial city. And the structure shows the industrial areas and the railways themselves. This is just a starting slide to indicate the scale of the past events. I'll tell you what happened in the past and how this affected the city. Let's try to imagine that this is a big snowball encompassing all these territories. The spot, which you can see in the center, occupies a big area, and probably it can be compared to the territory inside the third transport road ring, which is much bigger than the Garden Ring. This gives you some idea of the schedule, of the scale and the area occupied by industrial installations. And I think, therefore, we need to look for completely different solutions. These areas should not just be restructured to for some other functions. The situation is changing rapidly now. So let's look back at our traditional values. And I would like to talk today about the creative clusters that are growing just by themselves. It's natural process, and this happens in the former industrial territories of former industrial enterprises. Mainly, I'm talking about former old-time factories, and the creative people are turning them into a different space and use it for their business and for their creative work. So I'll try. My brief presentation is called "The Fabrics of Creativity." I would like to brief you on the two sites of the four sites indicated here. The four sites are the electrical plant or Elektrozavod, the distillery or Vinzavod, Red October, and Art Play Center. Why have I picked up this particular subject for my presentation at this urban forum? And what experience has Moscow got here? I think Moscow has less experience than some European cities like Berlin, for instance. Berlin is very experienced here, and its first report on small business indicated that there were 18,000 small enterprises generating 11% of the total GDP in the region. We looked at the dynamics of this business, and it turned out then in 2010 it was already 17 billion per year, and the share of small business in the total GDP increased up to 22%. So I have no questions about that. And in Moscow, the figures are much smaller. It could be 1.5 or 2% maximum. But how do these creative sites work? And what are the creative culture institutions in Moscow? Well, it's theaters, first and foremost, and in Berlin it's art galleries. But the second pillar of culture and creativity is the initiatives of the society. They create the environment for the creative and culture groups of people, including actors, artists, architects, and so on. I'm an architect too, and this is indeed close to my heart. This is something unique. And the people doing that create really unique products. They possess the required knowledge and experience, which are also unique. They also create creative environment and even creative districts in Moscow. Certainly the scale of this work is insignificant, but they contribute to the economy too. It's not just the market of books or art, but they contribute to the telecom business, sales, and so on. So we really need to think about it. Let me brief you on this art culture. I would like to start with the center, which is called Art Play. It comprises about 20 creative workshops, many stores, of course. There are 4 big halls. It's located near the Yauza River. This is a real industrial area, and it's located in a former industrial building. But as you can see, it's quite suitable for creative work too. The forms of work are workshops, exhibitions, and many other events. And now a few words about the electrical plant. There's a team of creative people, including architects, artists, and other specialists. They also have all required production facilities, like industrial printers, printing machines. Some of them are based on laser technologies. Recently, for instance, we jointly created a huge map of Moscow River, applying the laser print technology, woodwork technologies. Also, there are teams that deal with clothes, movies, TV, and so on. What inspires them all is the building itself, the architectural image. This electrical plant is something like a city inside a bigger city. It has inspiring, this is an iconic building, and it has inspiring information. It creates the feeling that the place is unique, which helps the people to create their products. This is the interior part. It looks quite natural, but it's the result of work. These are the places where the classes of painting are conducted. It's also the place for creativity. As I said, this is a natural process. The place itself helps the people to become more creative. This is the picture of the team. It's just one of the pictures. They really enjoy teamwork. And as you saw, in fact, this is the picture of their human potential. Many of these guys are quite young, they're even younger than the company. But it's very important. I'm just worried about their copyright. Have they registered their copyright and do they pay taxes? They certainly pay taxes, they pay a rent, but they need help here. Well, let's not argue. This is an interesting subject to be disputed. Andrei has made an interesting presentation, which brings us back to the point, to one of Ruth's conclusions. She mentioned that industrial enterprises were reduced, and it gives birth to other sectors and to creativity. So it draws our attention to services like cafes, restaurants, and so on. But I think some of the services are still related to industry or have been inherited from the industrial sector. It's the ITs, consulting, and in some cases they become independent. Let me also recall Igor's presentation. He mentioned one very important figure.
В этом смысле я как бы верну это к тому, что
Professional trajectories. It's important to understand that competences should develop in a different atmosphere and in a different space. They should have unusual combinations. There are psychologists and mathematicians and one person, no one's surprised. And we are teaching engineers on economic professions. We need managers of a different type. The city will have a new atmosphere, and in this sense, these areas are overlapping, and it's connected with territorial planning. We are turning a railway our circle into industrial zone, and around it industrial clusters are developing, and transport component does not play a very important role in it. They need other investments, other balances, and this ring can connect a great number of developed territories if we create conditions for technological offices. Because Sergei Ivanovich mentioned that we create a balance of jobs, but we can just see offices. How can we accelerate them? How can we supply them with innovations? Engineering and industrial design should be connected with the special territories, with a special atmosphere, then giving it the preferences like in Zelenograd, concentrating our efforts, federal subsidies and city subsidies, we will be able to create the necessary support and create intellectual centers. I think that what Pierre showed in his presentation was a picture at night. And if we look at the territories of development, they are cut by railroads that are connected to non-existing factories. A car cannot pass there. These are huge, many hectare territories. And people cannot pass there either. Only helicopters with government officials who are giving instructions to develop these territories. So territorial development of the city allows to create foundations for the implementation of intellectual component. I agree with Igor Rubanovich because the age of big enterprises is gone. It doesn't mean that we need to eliminate them. However, the city should be ready to plan the space for boutiques, internal public places, to create new prototypes. And a few words about Dmitry Sakharov's statement. While we were waiting for the press conference, accidentally, heads met for a biotechnological enterprise, microelectronic enterprise, and all of them said that currency income was important for them. Two projects were born between these two enterprises, projects of two factories. Well, questions now. Well, you know, about cluster development of territories, I would like to say a few words about Andrei Leonidovich's words. A cluster is a place for the development of creative industries. This is mostly small or medium-sized business, which is the basis for healthy economy. Now, I would like to yield the floor to Marina Hrustalova, co-founder of the Center of Capitalization of Heritage. 3 minutes. Thank you, dear colleagues. I'm lucky to speak after my colleagues. We live in a very interesting time. It is the era of Aquarius, or information age. All of us live at a time which has changed, and we were all born in a different epoch. When we were born, these factories were working, cars and tractors were produced. Now there are a lot of industrial zones in Moscow and other big cities, and they're empty now. Mostly these are assets not connected with the activities of the company, like terra incognita in the city, territories that cut the city. What can be done about it? It's a difficult question. When industry appeared in Moscow, I think in the 12th century, the first workshops appeared in 18th century. And what we know about industrial architecture, these red bricks started appearing in the 19th century. And they're very interesting in terms of architecture, and they'll be able to last for several more ages. Now, different construction started, which was not counted for ages, for temporary use only. What do we have in Moscow? We have a few attractive buildings. In early 2000s, art conversion started. Space connected with art, design, architecture. Andrei Leonidovich mentioned it. These are the pioneers of this movement. Some of them have moved to other spaces like Art Play and Garage. However, they are growing in number. We know Flacon, Red Rose, Stanislavski Factory. These are interesting and attractive objects. My colleagues and I started working in this area in 2004. We had a website, New Life. We added new examples to it, and we conducted panels, exhibitions, and different events. This is one of the panels in Art Play. This wave was noticed by federal authorities. Dmitry Medvedev in 2011 met with artists and said that governors and local administrations should provide historical buildings to people of art because it revives the territory and the quality, improves the quality of life. About 10 years ago, I started this work, factories along Moscow River and Yauza. There were over 3 dozens of them, and this I prepared a few days ago, factories on the river. There are about 1/3 fewer historical and industrial complexes between Moscow City and Zil. This is historical border of Moscow in 1917. Now there are about 20 complexes that can be used for reconstruction. These are different factories on the river, old ones, and many of them face the river and have already been turned into something new and unusual, like Red October. Some of them are pulled down. Textile factory and Gonchorная embankment. Some of them are reconstructed with the same dimensions, and new complexes appear. And now this is Zil, It's a huge territory comparable to Venice. What do we have on the river and not on the river? Badaevsky Brewery across the river from the White House. A big housing complex was planned there, and now the territory belongs to Absolute Company. A modern development is planned there. And also a huge office of Rosneft. Electric power station, example of constructivism. The plan was to turn it into a Russian Vanguard Center. Now Tashir is planning the construction of 40-story building. Iskosh factory, Gothic buildings, 1913. It has a nice pond in its territory. 1 kilometer away from Skolkovo is practically arrested. Here are a few more complexes. All these factories could work for the city, for the social structure, only they are in a poor state. What we have lost in the past few years. And this is what could be done. Interdepartmental interaction is required and a big program. Creative industry is part of industrial policy of the city, and we should look for the place for this industry. We have heard a lot of different proposals and comments. So what is it, conversion or innovation? I think that we need the innovation of conversion and conversion of innovation. These processes cannot be separated. And I think that digital and information world develops so quickly that we get a competitive advantage. Requirements and demands for the working force is growing. Traffic jams are growing not only by the new year, and everybody tries to demonstrate their intellect and creative processes are being finalized, and it's connected with increasing the efficiency of companies. It's a joke. Intellectual future of the economy in future industrial policy, the basic issue is redevelopment of industrial territories. It should be devoted to culture, creative industries, and understanding of new technological and aesthetic thinking. The city should balance these conditions, and the government of Moscow should participate in it. If we look at our culture, if we don't take individual enterprises, we are not technological enough as a nation. Everybody going to his office wants to do his work in a new manner. So we introduced different types of coefficients. In spite of this, many workers wanted to be individual. And now it's time for creativity. And this is the future of Moscow, and Moscow should start this trend. In the first quarter, regulations on the implementation of industrial policy of the city will be issued. I must thank all the speakers and experts. Thank you.